Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We have folks that I'm sure are still popping in. Appreciate everyone who's here on time. And we do want to get beginning on time, even though we still have folks joining us, because we have quite a bit of information to cover today. So this is our virtual meeting for compliance and improvement monitoring for significantly disproportionate local educational agencies. My name is Connie Silva, and I'm the director of the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project. I know that many of you are very familiar to me. So while we're getting started, please go ahead and chat and making sure that your little box there is set to everyone so that we can all see your comments, and just put in there, your name, your agency that you're with. We love seeing you here. We're happy to have you here. And we do use this chat check-in just as a way to confirm who's attending this meeting. So if you happen to be using somebody else's login, please go ahead and in chat put your own name, so that way we know that you're here and not thinking it's somebody else. And also sometimes LEAs I know participate as a group. So if you have more than one person with you, go ahead and note in chat that you've got the few of you that are participating. Thank you. Great to see all the familiar names. We are here in, as I said, in a meeting format. So you'll notice you can have your camera on. We'd love to see you. You are all muted, but during the session you will be able to unmute if you have a question you'd like to pose in person. But we will be using chat. So this meeting has closed captioning, so if you need that, please click on the icon at the bottom of your Zoom dock and you can activate that. And then also the meeting is being recorded, so just be aware of that. It will be available on our website shortly after the session, and we really do this because there's so much information, you'll probably want to review it at a later point. And also we know everybody couldn't make it here today, so we encourage you to share it with your colleagues, anyone who couldn't make it here today, and then we will share it in a follow-up email with everyone who was here as well. So, as I mentioned, we really do want you to ask questions as we go, so feel free to raise your hand or certainly post something in chat. That always works. And then we will also have a few polls that we'll ask you to participate in. We do have a video, so if you're having a hard time hearing me right now, you might want to adjust your volume to make sure you can hear the video in particular when it comes on. So the other thing I want to point out before we really get started is we have two different groups of LEAs that are joining us here today. And so you might be part of an LEA who is brand new to this. This is the first time you have been identified as significantly disproportionate. You probably have a CIM plan, but not anything that's been done to address significant disproportionality. So that's one group. We also have LEAs with us that have been significantly disproportionate for a number of years. And the CIM plan is a 3-year plan. So if you're in year 4 or perhaps even longer, you are doing another Stepwell submission. And so again, there's going to be some differences in those two groups. And we realize that. So as we go through, you might have different types of questions. One example is one of the required activities, your educational partners group. And if you're brand new to this, there's going to be more that you need to do in terms of setting up that group and understanding who should be involved. If you've been doing this for a while and you have an existing one, it's a time when you might be needing to go through that process, but it's more of a review. Is there somebody else you want to put on that team? Do you have the right members right now? Does it need to be revamped in any way, right? So just an example, but as we go through this, that's why we really want to encourage you to ask your questions. Your situation may be, kind of unique to you, but probably not unique to others in the room, right? So it's always nice if someone is willing to voice a question that others probably have as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and see. You have hopefully watched our introductory webinars. And so this one, you'll see that we have the folks that are involved in this work. So again, my name is Connie. You're going to hear from others from our team today. You'll hear from Dr. Susan Stewart and also Kian Lauser, 2 of our SPP-TAP members. And I also want to share the other folks that are some of them in the room and that you work with regularly. So we work with our 2 FMTA units, Unit 1 and Unit 4, and those are headed up by Barbara Gaskin and Dr. Jack Brimwall. So just want to show you the folks, and again, many of them are here in this meeting as well. They're here to support your work. So as I mentioned, you were introduced to our team and the work through a few recordings. There were 4 short recordings we wanted you to view before this. We recognize sometimes things get a little too busy and you may not have been able to do that. So it's helpful for us. We're going to do a quick poll so we can know how many of these you were able to view. So if you can click on any of them that you viewed, and if you didn't view any, that's all right. Again, it's helpful for us to know. While you're doing that, I do want to point out that the information we're sharing today is not a repeat of those recordings. So if you haven't had the opportunity to view one or all of them, please do go ahead and do that after this meeting at your convenience. There's information in those recordings that we will not be providing today. So we're going to build upon them, but again, it's helpful for us to know if we have folks that weren't able to see very much before this. So are we ready to share back? Okay, those are actually pretty high numbers. Thank you. Yeah, so it looks as though the majority of you have actually seen all 4 of them. That's good, very good to know. Thank you. Okay. So let's go through our objectives for today. So what we're hoping is during this time, you're going to learn about the CIM process to address significant disproportionality. So talking a little bit about what's unique to that process. And you're going to learn about the activities in step 1 for the CIM for significantly disproportionate LEAs. So we'll do an overview of those activities and a little bit in depth in a couple of them. Then you're going to be informed on the importance of a well-formed CIM team and an educational partners group. And you'll understand where to find the required documents, because there are different documents for this process than for CIM. And then again, some helpful tools, of course. And then we'll end by discussing just some of our next steps for all of you. Okay. All right, so we want to start first just by, again, as I mentioned, there's 2 different groups in this room, but we also wanted to show you for 2025, what do the districts or the LEAs that have been identified as significantly disproportionate, what do they look like? So you can see in this slide, I know it's a lot of information, so I'll just walk you through it a little bit. There's 76 LEAs that are identified as significantly disproportionate. 16 of those are brand new, meaning this is the first time they've been identified, or they had at least gap years between an identification and now. 60 of those 76 are continuing, so they already have a CIM plan in place. 38 of those need a new Stepwell submission, so their previous CIM plan was 3 years old, so it's time to do a new one. And 22 of those are doing amendments, so either amendment in their first year, or their second year, or their third year of their CIM. Okay. And then you can see the indicators, and I know this might be a little small for you, but we wanted to show you the breakdown of where districts are identified. So we currently don't have any districts identified for disproportionate discipline. However, many of you might be actually disproportionate for it yet, but not yet identified as significantly disproportionate. So you don't see any of those on this list, but we do have those under the separate schools. We have some of those. We have some out for overall over-identification, and then we have them under the different specific disabilities. So you can see that there's quite a few under other health impairment, specific learning disability, and emotional disability. Those are the main categories. I do want to point out on this table, when we say we have the column that has most frequent ethnicity, those are not the only ones. So for instance, when you see other health impairment and it says African American and Hispanic, that doesn't mean that we don't have districts identified that perhaps are for their white students on OHI, but they're not the predominant groups in that. So I just wanted to point that out. Again, just gives you a picture of what the districts look like and what's the company that you have. So I'm going to ask, again, if you know what your indicator is, what you are actually out in this year, identified as significantly disproportionate. Oh, I'm sorry. Will you please share those stats again? We are sharing the PowerPoints, right? So make sure that you can download those PowerPoints and then you can get those. So, yeah. So the poll that you see in front of you right now is just to ask you to click, and you can click on more than one. if you are out in more than one area, because that's one thing I realized I didn't mention when I was looking over at the table. There are 108, if you look at that table previously, there's 108 indicators, but we only have 76 LEAs. So clearly there are LEAs that are out in more than one area and some in quite a few areas. So I just want to point that out. That's why the numbers don't match on that. Okay. And if you're not sure about the area that you are out in, that would certainly be in your letter. Yeah, so you can see from the poll here, specific learning disability is the one that has the highest percentage of folks that are responding in that. And you saw from the tables that that is the area that has the highest number of identifications currently in California. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so as I said, we're going to spend a little bit of time going over the specifics of CIM for districts that are identified as significantly disproportionate. Before we do that, I want to share just some of the things that are actually similar. So what's the same? If you've done a CIM plan before, what is it that is the same from what you've done before? So basically the process is the same, the submission timeline and platform, Stepwell, is the same, and you are receiving technical assistance support. That will look a little different, but you are going to be receiving some supports, and we'll talk about that today. So as a reminder, the CIM process was rooted in both implementation science and improvement science. That is the same for when you're working to address significantly disproportionate. You use that same four-step process of which you're collecting and analyzing data in step 1 and step 2. Then you're developing a plan for improvement in step 3. And step 4 is sort of you're implementing and monitoring the work that you're doing to determine whether or not you're making a change in the changes that you were hoping for. So you're probably very familiar with the plan, do, study, act cycle, and that's basically what it incorporates, right? Especially once you're implementing and monitoring, taking a look at what's working, perhaps making adjustments if you need to, and amendments just based on a need to adjust something is possible for your CIM plan, as well as whether you're out for significant disproportionality or for some other area, right? So that's the same. The other thing that I mentioned is the same as the due dates, right? So for step 1, the due date for that submission is July 10th. For step 2, the submission deadline is October 10th. And for step 3, in other words, the plan submission is November 14th. That would be of 2025, right? So that's the same whether you're working on a CIM plan previously or now CIM for significant disproportionality. So what we're going to talk about next is technical assistance, and I'm going to pass it to Kian, and she will talk about the technical assistance that's available through SPP-TAP.
Thank you, Connie. All right, so what you're seeing on the screen, you might remember from our SPP-TAP introductory recording. We briefly discussed some of the various TA supports that are available to you. So the puzzle that's illustrated here provides, an overview of the multiple TA supports that you have access to help guide and support you through this entire process. So the California Department of Education Focus Monitoring Technical Assistance Consultants, FMTAs for short, as well as our team here at SPP-TAP and our SPP-TAP TA facilitators. So we specialize in supporting your LEA by offering tailored technical assistance, professional learning opportunities, and resources to help you identify and address the systemic issues that are contributing to your significant disproportionality. So as a team, we all work collaboratively, communicate, and continuously learn together to ensure that your LEAs receive consistent, well-rounded guidance and support that aligns with federal and state requirements. So once you've been identified as significantly disproportionate, it's truly important that you must prioritize this work to take meaningful and intentional action step to address what's contributing to you as a result of your over-identification. This process does require commitment, reflection, and as I'd mentioned, systemic change, but know that you're not alone. This work is challenging. However, it is also very rewarding to know that you have a strong network of support available to your district. All right, so as Connie mentioned earlier, there are 2 groups here with us today. Those that are newly identified as significantly disproportionate, and those that have been working on addressing significant disproportionality for at least 3 years. So our TA support is tailored to meet the needs of each of these groups. If you're an LEA that has just been newly identified, you will receive individualized technical assistance support from one of our SPP-TAP facilitators who's going to be assigned to your district. So this TA facilitator will work directly with your team to provide guidance, resources, as well as structured support throughout the compliance and improvement process. So if you've been newly identified, your LEA should have received an email from me regarding the CDE funded technical assistance support, which included an opportunity to schedule a short meeting with me to discuss what those supports are. If you've not signed up yet, I highly recommend that you do so as soon as possible. This will allow us to get you connected with a TA facilitator to ensure that your district is on track to effectively address your significant proportionality, as well as get you jump started on your CIM plan. All right, so in terms of upcoming several supports, both required and optional, some of the required events for all LEAs submitting a CIM plan via Stepwell will be provided both in person and virtual. In terms of the workshops for steps 1, 2, and 3, you should have received information to register for our step 1 in-person workshops, which we'll be offering at 6 locations for you to be able to attend one of the workshops. If you've not registered already, please do so as space is limited. Thank you, Jen, for sharing that in chat for the registration. Please also be on the lookout for in the coming months for information to register for our step 2 and 3 workshops. Both of these are also going to be offered virtually. Specifically for our step 1 and 2 workshops, we have pre-work assignments that will need to be completed prior to you attending the workshop. And then in terms of our LEAs that have been engaged in this process for 3 years or more, we will be offering a range of optional topical supports, some of which include community of practice meetings that provide opportunities for peer learning, shared experiences, discussion on best practices. The COPs that we're planning are going to be focused on implementation, challenges that specific LEAs around high school that are what they're facing, LEAs with small student populations, some of which include charters and rural LEAs, and then also a group that's going to examine common LEAs who are out for Hispanic SLD, which is our larger population. And of course, our focus isn't only going to be on the challenges and issues, but there's also going to be opportunities for you to network and provide strategies that are shared by our tier facilitators as well as our participants. And then in addition to that, we will also have office hours, and these are drop-in support opportunities for you to be able to access and dedicated time for individualized questions that you might have, technical assistance, as well as guidance that you might need. All right, and I'm going to pause for a second. I know that was kind of quick. I don't know if there's any questions around that. Okay, I think we are good. I'll go ahead and pass it back to Connie.
Thanks, Can. Okay, so we're going to get into what's unique for addressing significant disproportionality under the CIM plan. So the elements that are specific to requirements for significant disproportionality are spelled out in the federal regulations in the Individuals with Disabilities Act, and you can see where it is right there in the Code of Federal Regulations. But we're specifically going to talk for the rest of this morning on our time around some of those specific elements. So one of them is comprehensive coordinated early intervening services. That's a requirement again under IDEA, where you need to move your funds to specifically address the disproportionality that you have in your LEA by providing comprehensive coordinated early intervening services. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The focus obviously is also on race, ethnicity, and culture. So the work that you do will have a definite cultural lens in terms of what you specifically put in place, and we'll say a little bit more about that. You also, as I mentioned already, the Educational Partners Group is unique to the CIM for districts that are addressing significant disproportionality. And then there's an annual policies, practice, and procedures review, which is not a compliance review, so we'll share a little bit more information about that process for you. The other thing is a target population. There's a specific group that you have in mind when you're doing this improvement plan and looking at systemic changes to make within the LEA. So we'll talk about what that process looks like and who those students could be. And then lastly, that budget, which I already mentioned, in order to provide comprehensive coordinated early intervening services, as you know, you will be moving 15% of your Part B funds into this particular account line. And that's what you will use to provide those systemic changes and those services to students. So those are some of the things, again, what's unique, and that's what we'll be talking about the rest of our time here. So I'm going to go ahead and begin with talking about race and ethnicity and really pointing out that this is the focus. This is what's at the heart of disproportionality, is race and ethnicity. And the federal regulations certainly address this. So they notice that certain groups of students are being over-disciplined, over-identified, or served in a different setting, right? Not in the general education setting. And again, the defining feature of the students that are experiencing that is their race or ethnicity. And most often this happens unintentionally, but the consequences obviously are very significant for students. And so in order to address this, we have to be explicit about looking at the differences between those student groups and their own experience. And that's a very, again, something that is not done typically when you're looking at systemic improvements in other ways. I know many districts do that, so it might be something you already have in place in other ways. This identification in special education really does impact general education as well, and that's where most of these systemic changes that you make will be happening. So it is something that if you already have a culture of looking at those things in your LEA, obviously that will be easier. If you don't, and particularly right now where we know we're getting a lot of information about not addressing or not looking at racial differences, it could be a little confusing and challenging. So we will be with you in this journey as we talk about this. So as we look at step one, we wanted to start by focusing on those applications where those actions where this application of a cultural lens is most crucial. And so as we talk about each step, you'll notice that we do really focus on that. We're going to start right now just by taking a look at hearing some student voice, right? So what you're going to see is very brief, a couple minutes of a PBS, if we're so familiar with PBS News Hour brief but spectacular video. It's about race and stereotypes that underestimate so many of our students, and in particular our students of color.
Shortly before the pandemic, our brief but spectacular team traveled to Georgia, where they spoke with two high school seniors, Audrey McNeil and Shaylon Walker, about race and about being underestimated.
I recently got a full ride to a very prestigious university, and I went back to go visit my elementary school teachers. And so there's this one teacher, she runs into me in the hall, and the other teacher I was walking with, she starts bragging on me, and she's like, yeah, Shaylin here has got a full ride to Boston University. And the other teacher stops and she goes, so what is it? And I was like, what is what? She's like, what's your sport? Excuse me. I got an academic and leadership scholarship. I don't play a sport.
2 years ago, I was sitting in my graphics and design class, and there was an anonymous death threat using the N-word. There was no investigation whatsoever. Black people, we internalize these things. You know, does my life really matter to my school or my community or my county, who doesn't even want to look into these threats?
When you even look at how teachers interact with students of color versus white students, when a teacher comes up to you and you respond in a manner that might not be cheerful or might not be what they want to hear, it's automatically, oh, you have an attitude. And I've experienced this. I'm not even that type of person. Like, if you know me, I don't even have that type of attitude. And so when I get that, it's kind of like, whoa. But then each time it kind of becomes less and less like a whoa, because it is a pattern. It's so familiar. Oh, if I'm not smiling, oh, I'm gonna be taken as an angry Black woman. We have parents come forward, we have actual students come forward, we have picture evidence, we have recordings, we have everything saying, hey, we have a problem here. But the county comes back to us and they're like, no, we've had training on that. No, that's not happening. You're not gonna make me think I'm crazy, because I know what I feel and I know what I see every day.
There's this quote by Benjamin Franklin that says that justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are just as outraged as those who are. So sometimes when I'm the only Black person in a classroom that has to speak on issues that are particularly challenging or things that make me or other people feel uncomfortable, it keeps me going because I know that these conversations are important, and it pushes me to challenge not only myself but my peers to talk about these things.
The first thing you have to do is acknowledge the problem. Even if it may not be you or your people group, you have to take a step back and look in and see that something is wrong. Once you've learned about the issue, you're gonna take that knowledge and enlighten others. You're gonna open their eyes to something that may not even be apparent to them. And so once you've done all those three things, you yourself have created a vessel for change. You are a catalyst that will lead to a greater future for those coming after us.
My family has lived in Georgia for generations. We have directly been affected by the institution of slavery. And so I see a people, especially in my family, that is strong, and people who want to fight for change and to keep moving forward. I use that to inspire myself to keep creating change because it can be done. My name is Audrey McNeil.
My name is Shaylin Walker,
And this is my brief but spectacular take
on acknowledging that there's a problem.
Two strong young women.
Okay, so again, that's just a little snippet to kind of point out what is different and what we really will be focusing on. So what I mentioned target population earlier, and I want to point out we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this today. It's actually a process that will happen in step 2 and step 3, but it is important because it's one of the unique differences from a CIM plan in that we're really using that comprehensive coordinated early intervening services in order to address and prevent the over-identification that's happened, whether it's, again, placement, discipline, or actual identification. And so in order to do that, you're really looking at what students are at risk of being over-identified, over-disciplined, placed separately, and so on. So that's going to be an important focus in the data pieces that we're talking about in step 1, although the process of selecting them will not happen until step 2. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Susan, and she'll get us started on our next steps.
Great. Thank you, Connie. Yeah, I am excited that we've had this opportunity to get some of that foundational information in order to help us be thinking about the actual work that you're going to be doing. So let's get started with that. And at first, what I'd like to do is I'd like to illustrate for you how the timelines of the funding that Connie's just mentioned for the activities in your CIM will interact with the timeline of the plan itself. And as you know, the CIM Plan for Improvement timeline begins on the date that you receive your annual determination letter, and that plan is for 36 months. So as you're thinking about your plan, really think of a 3-year timeline. The budget for the CSACE activities that will be part of your plan is based on the federal cycle of 27 months. That means that your CSACE funds will be available to you July 1st. Of this year, 2025, and will be available through September 30th of 2027. Now, it's likely, not guaranteed, but it's likely that your LEA will be identified as significantly disproportionate again next year, which means that you would have another budget cycle and you would need to track and use that budget accordingly within your CIM plan. And then if you're identified for a 3rd year, you will have a 3rd budget. There's a very short time where you'll be tracking 3 different budgets, but for the bulk of the time, it would be just the 2 budgets. So it's important to have your fiscal person on board so that they can help you keep track of that information. We're talking about the CIM plan for 2025, which is your initial identification. Each subsequent year of identification within that 2025 CIM plan, you will be writing an amendment. So you'll have one in 2026 and 2027. You'll be amending the 2025 CIM plan. And the reason for that is you want to accommodate for the new budget that you will receive. You'll also need to complete the annually and federally mandated policies, practices, and procedures review, which we'll talk about in a moment. And also you'll want to respond to your outcome data. Remember those PDSA cycles. The hope is that as you implement your plan for improvement, you will learn and you will adjust and adapt. And so that you have better and better outcomes for your students. So that amendment is that opportunity to make that shift so that you can have more and more impact for your students. Now, if you are identified as significantly disproportionate for a fourth year, you will begin that new cycle again, and you'll have a new budget. I don't want you to get too hung up on the details, but I did want to give you the big picture of how those timelines interact and are in place across your CIM plan. Some of you have asked about your disproportionality data, and so I want to show you where you can find that information. You're going to go to the caltan.info website. Now, be sure it's caltan.info. If you use a different ending, it will take you to a very different site. So use caltan.info website. And when you get there, you're going to select the monitoring menu or tab at the top. And in the pull down menu, you will select the LEA monitoring status. You're going to scroll to the bottom of the page, and that's where you will find the significant disproportionality data file that's outlined in red. That data file indicates your areas of disproportionality for particular student groups in the last 3 data years, along with the risk ratios for each of those years. And on the far right side of the spreadsheet, it says where you are significant based on those data sets. Now, if you have questions about it, we want you to contact either your FMTA consultant, if you know who that person is, or Stephen Rogers at CDE. Also on the Cowtown info site, you will find a lot of information that you need for the activities in those 4 stages or 4 steps of the CIM plan that Connie mentioned ahead of time or earlier in a moment in our session today. On that caltown.info website, again, you're going to select the monitoring tab at the top of the page. Then you will click on the compliance and improvement monitoring in the pull down menu. And then you will scroll to the bottom of the page and you'll click on significant disproportionality. That then you'll see, provide you those step options at the bottom of the page. So we're going to circle step 1, and that will take us to the activities for significant disproportionality step 1 page. At the top of the page, there's some introductory information, and it also includes a link to the SPP-TAP.org website. So let's take a peek at that now. You'll find at SPP-TAP.org a lot of supporting information. There are a couple of tabs I specifically want you to be aware of. The first is the SIGDIS tab, and this has some key background information about significant disproportionality, applying a cultural lens to this work. As Connie just mentioned, it's so important to what we're doing. We highly recommend that you read this so that you have an understanding of what a cultural lens can look like and how to apply it. And then there's some overview information about the significant CIM process for significant disproportionality. Next to that is the calendar tab. This is a super helpful tab in identifying activities that are important for you. If you've been on SPP-TAP.org before, this is a brand new tab, and we're very excited about it because if you look for a tag, so you can go into the calendar event and you'll find that there are tags at the bottom. Look for a tag of Stepwell submission. You will be able to find all of the pertinent events, both required and optional, as Kian mentioned. And inside each of those events, you will have links to the pre-work, if there is some, the supporting materials like our participant folders, and the recordings if we record that particular session. All of those will reside under each event, and you'll be able to go backwards to see previous events so that all of that information will be very accessible to you and easily found. Let's jump back to the caltown.info site because this is where all of what are called activity handouts are, and I'll explain that. If you go to the bottom of the page, you'll see that there's a little box. It's hard to see, I imagine, on your screen, but it says Start Here. These are Start Here indicators, and after that are activity handouts that are next to the Start Here indicators. Those activity handouts are for each of the activities you will complete and provide information about inside of Stepwell. We're going to start with the Assurances and Prerequisites activity handout. And before we actually begin, that is that is a copy of the Assurances and Prerequisites activity handout, but I don't expect you to be able to read it. I wanted to show you about how each of the activity handouts is laid out and assure you that this is not unique to SIGDIS. All CIM has the same structure of these activity handouts. So at the very top, there's a header, and you can't see it very well, but just above where it says CIM, it says Step 1. So all of the headers will indicate for you which step you're in when you're doing a particular activity. Secondly is the activity title, and unique for significant disproportionality is a subtitle. It may sound something like significant disproportionate LEAs or for LEAs addressing significant disproportionality. That subtitle indicates that this is an activity that's specific to significant disproportionality. It may be similar to an activity like, for example, data drill down. There's a data drill down in all the different CIM levels. The data drill down for significant disproportionality will be different, and there it will have a subtitle to indicate that. The purpose provides the rationale for the activity, and oftentimes in relation to SIGDIS, you will find that there are some language around the federal mandate that pertains to that particular activity. Then there are step-by-step instructions and links that are embedded within the instructions to the resources for those activity steps. And also at the bottom, all of those links that are in the activity handout at the instructions portion are excerpted at the bottom of the page. These are considered the primary resources for this activity. There are additional resources that we'll let you know about. There are some resources that you can find on SPP-TAP.org in case you want to dig a little bit deeper or you have a particular issue or need.
So
Yes.
Susan, I'm going to ask that we pause. We have a question from Francisco. So Francisco,
Okay.
can you unmute and go ahead and ask?
Yeah, I was looking at the Calten's website and I was looking at the other data files that are also available. And so we were looking at it as a team. Uh, However, the two other data files there don't necessarily have a date. Am I to assume they're the previous school year, or um, can you provide a little bit of explanation on that?
Connie, do you have any information about that, or do we need to ask one of our CDE folks to answer
The
that?
unified ADL data file and disproportionality data file, which is very helpful because we can see how many years we've been disproportionate or that we're disproportionate in other areas. Because it does tell you how many years, but it doesn't say specifically the years on it.
It doesn't have the year on it. Okay. Yeah, then you probably want to connect with your FMTA consultant. There might be again, some errors in those, but there might be just some gaps in information. But they are, yeah, they are really helpful, and they should be, again, because they go year by year and tell you what your data is out, what your data is for that year. I wanted to point out, because it's related to a question that somebody asked behind the scenes, which is about being identified for discipline, where they've noticed they've been identified 3 years in a row for discipline, disproportionate, but they're not yet significantly disproportionate. And I wanted to point out the reason for that is the identification in discipline, in the area of discipline, it actually has a lag year because of when data is collected. So if you see that you are disproportionate looking at your data for 3 years in a row, being, again, risk ratio over 3.0, you will be identified next year. Right, because it's a lag year in data. And so I know districts know that if you have 3 years in a row, you're identified, but discipline has a lag year. So you might think, oh, there's an error. We should be identified as significantly disproportionate for discipline, but you wouldn't be yet. So as of right now, that's one of the things that happens. Again, if you have questions about your specific data, I think it's best to talk with your FMTA consultants, because those years should be available to you so you can see which years they are. Yeah.
I see that there's another question that sounds like it may be a similar question with those data files. Jody's asking in the Q&A, what does non-compliant in the non-compliance review mean? As far as I know, we have completed all expected reports and plans and are making progress. Connie, do you want to take that?
Well, again, I think you'd have to speak with your FMTA consultant, because there are various compliance areas. So I think in order to know the specific reason, you'd have to get that information.
Okay. And Heather had a question about the 30-day timeline from the receipt of the ADL for the assurances form. And Kishan, can you speak to that? Because you may have a better idea of what the expectations are on that. You can unmute yourself.
So the assurance form will be sent out via email to all the 2025 LEAs identified as significantly disproportionate this week. So you'll receive that document and you'll have 30 days from the date of receipt of the email to send that in.
Okay.
And the instructions will be on the email too.
Great. Thank you, Kishan. That is a little bit of a difference from last year when the assurances and the ADL came at the same time. So I'm glad you asked, Heidi. That just means you've got a little extra time to get that done. So thank you so much. Okay. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to move forward. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's on the assurances document itself, the assurances and prerequisites activity handout. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that assurances form for those who may not be familiar. This is unique to significant disproportionality, and it must be filled out by HLEA. And the assurances document outlines 7 requirements that you are assuring that you are will comply with. And it starts with complying with the federal regulations from setting aside 15% of the LEA's Part B IDEA funding for CSACE, all the way to compliance with CDE's guidance and monitoring and the 5 other requirements in between. A preliminary budget is required, and all of the instructions are in the assurances document for that preliminary budget. So it's important that you've got your fiscal person who's looking at that. And it's essential that this document is completed and thoroughly read and signed by the following people: the LEA superintendent, the LEA special education director, the school board chairperson, and the SELPA director. The remaining instructions on this activity handout are about those required recordings that Connie asked about very early on, and also a document that's offered by the Office of Special Education Programs. And this is a helpful document to know about. You might not read the whole document, but scan it so that you have a familiarity of what is in it and also know how to access it when you have questions, because this will be one of the first places you go if you have a question about the federal requirements. Now, I'm going to pause in the activity handout overviews for a minute because I want to tell you about a few other resources that will help you in completing your CIM plan development and Stepwell submissions. It seems like February to November is a long time to do these development activities, but the work really requires intentionality in order to get the activities done in a timely and thorough manner. Significant disproportionality activities, some are more intensive, there's more of them. So you need to be thoughtful about making sure that you get those done in a timely manner so that you can meet each of CDE's 3 deadlines that Connie mentioned earlier. This pacing guideline that we are providing for you has all of the activities and the steps within those activities and the target dates for those activities. Now, those target dates are ones that we have kind of provided to you to help you think about pacing, but this is a Word document and you can adjust it for your own LEA, what makes sense for you. So when you download it, you can make it your own in any way that you want to. And this is available in the participant folder. Okay, great. Another resource that is under development at the moment is the Stepwell instructions. So once you've completed each of the activities, you need to translate that work into a summary report on the Stepwell platform. The platform itself has no instructions, so you'll need this instruction handout and make sure it's for the significantly disproportionate LEAs because it's different. And this document is, as I said, under development and is not available at this time, but we will be sure that you get that as soon as it's ready. And also you'll be able to find it on the Caltan website right underneath the assurances and prerequisite activity handout. In addition, we're providing a Stepwell template. And I encourage you to use this template or something that you create as a place to capture exactly what you're going to be putting into Stepwell. Every year we hear of LEAs that have spent a lot of time putting their information into Stepwell, and for one reason or another, it disappears. And it's just not saved. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And we want to help you prevent the frustration and the angst that goes with having put a lot of time and effort into writing your summaries and then having them disappear. So it adds a small step, but I highly recommend, whether it's this template or if you just do your own Word doc or Google Doc, feel free to make your own. But we recommend that you have somewhere that you are capturing the data that you're going to put into Stepwell so that it doesn't accidentally get lost. And when this particular is a Google Doc, and Jen has put the link into chat, when you click on that link, it's going to prompt you to copy the document. As soon as you hit that, you will be, a copy of the document will be made. You'll be able to use it in Google as a Google document, or you can download it and use it as a Word document.
Susan, when we're done today, we'll unlock the access to it.
Okay, thank you for checking on that. All right. The last thing is we want to remind you that the CIM process should be documented in one way or another. You can see we've got 6 ideas of how you might want to do that. You may have another process that you have done either with a CIM plan or an LCAP or a previous plan for CSAs. Whatever you do, we want you to do that because it provides several purposes, and I'm going to give you 3, and you might have others that make it a really meaningful reason to do it for you. It provides a record of the decisions that have made, when they were made, how they were made, and also it ensures that there's kind of a shared understanding of the journey that your LEA has undertaken to create this systemic improvement. Also, if what you put into Stepwell is not sufficient enough for CDE to approve it, they may ask for a little bit more information. If you've got all your documents in one place, it's a lot easier to find that information and provide it to them as soon as possible. Okay. Oops, there we go. So we're now on to activity handout number 2, which is the CIM team creation. I cut off the header so that you can see more of the instructions. This handout provides guidance on developing your CIM team, and this is really the leadership team that guides the work and has decision-making authority. And the full list of required and potential CIM team members is on the activity handout. The required members of the team are here outlined on the slide. And I'll talk through a couple of those. So we know that superintendent leadership is really key to addressing significant disproportionality because the superintendent's voice really elevates this work and ensures that it receives the attention it deserves. Even though LEAs are identified as significantly disproportionate in special education data, addressing these disparate student experiences and outcomes requires the systemic improvements in the general education environment. So the superintendent has the power to leverage this process for system-wide improvements. uniting special education, general education, and the community to create those more equitable outcomes for students. It's also very helpful to have additional general education representation on the team in various ways that can contribute to and guide the work. And because the work has a significant financial investment by the LEA, it's important that a financial or a fiscal representative is involved from the initial assurances documentation to the planning of activities and budgets, all the way to the quarterly progress and expenditure reports in the implementation. Also, many SELPA directors have worked with other LEAs who are significantly disproportionate. They may be able to provide regional supports as well as providing insights that they have from their experiences with other LEAs. So the CSACE funding is connected to the special education resources that the LEAs are allocated and that are distributed by the SELPA. So the SELPA really needs to be informed and participate in these meetings. So even though the work is done in general education, the money comes through special education, and it's important to maintain that. And I'm going to just stop for a moment and see if there are any questions that I need to respond to. Looks like you've addressed them in chat. Is that true, Connie?
Yeah, if anybody wants to speak up, I understand sort of the confusion around you're developing a new plan, but you have a current amendment in your prior CIM plan that has just been recently approved. So again, feel free to speak up if there's sort of more detail or that's wanted, but hopefully the answer was okay.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, the next group is the Educational Partners Group. And again, this is a unique activity within the CIM process. And as shown on the slide, your educational partners should consist of the members of the CIM team. And I want to highlight a few other required partners. Community members, as well as those who have lived experience of the over-identified group, so family members and students, helps ensure that the perspective of that particular group is not only represented, but it's considered and valued. Very important to have those individuals on the Educational Partners Group. And because the group has that financial commitment, again, the fiscal representative should be a part. There may be others that you should consider, and there's a much longer list on this educational partners list. People like site administrators, general and special education teachers, and there may be others that are unique to your context, like bargaining unit representatives, who are going to be critical to the success of this work. We've touched on the policies, practices, and procedures review. The reason I put that kind of red outline on purpose is because this is one of the areas that are federally mandated. So we're going to look at the language from the federal mandate to do the policies, practices, and procedures review. And it's really kind of two parts. The first part of the law describes the requirement under significant disproportionality that this is an annual review, and that means that every year that you are identified, you must complete another policies, practices, and procedures review. It looks a little different from year to year, but it must be done. Also, this is different from Dispro and from other policies and practices reviews that you may have been a part of. So it's important to pay attention to the details. And part of that is seen in the second part of the law, which describes why LEAs are to complete the PPP, policies, practices, and procedures review. The review is done in order to identify and address any policy, practice, and procedure that is a contributing factor to the disproportionate student outcomes based on race and ethnicity. So these PPP that are identified then need to be addressed, and they typically become part of the CIM plan because they're not typically quick fixes. because a change to a policy or a practice means that there's a development of the new policy or improved procedures, and there is a need for training, coaching, and monitoring of that practice or procedure to ensure that there's fidelity to it and to measure whether it has resulted in the desired outcome. So this is a key activity, and we'll discuss more about it when we're together during the Step 1 workshop. And because gathering data is so key to developing a solid plan, we will focus both on the qualitative and quantitative data gathering at the Step 1 workshop. And this will include parent input, the data drill down, and the case study. And also at the Step 1 workshop, we'll talk about the consolidation activity, which is really kind of a summarizing of all the work that has gone on in Step 1. And I'm going to toss it back to Connie for some Q&A.
Yeah, so we recognize that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. As again, you'll get the recording of this so you can listen to it again if that's helpful. But we also want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions at this point that you are currently having. Well, obviously, as has been mentioned several times, we'll be talking about more of this in Step 1. We actually, in the Step 1 workshop, will also give you a sample Step 1 submission. I think that kind of helps with, particularly if you haven't done this before. I noticed there is a question in chat that Tasha, you asked about why the process is so delayed, including when the data is reported. So I can't speak to the data piece, that's a CDE question, but the process partly is delayed in that, again, when you're identified, you do need to have time to develop a plan, and that any plan is not going to be something that actually addresses those contributing factors. If you just sort of go on what your hunches are or what again, sort of a quick fix, I think it's this, let's, start doing this thing. So the root cause analysis process and the identification of those factors is what's key to actually getting out of significant disproportionality and making systemic changes that really change things for students. So it does take time. And we know, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, that this is based on improvement science and implementation science. Both of those, bodies of work have shown that systemic change takes 3 to 5 years. So it's actually a really good thing that CDE has CIM plans that have a 3-year process. Yes, of course, Tasha, please go ahead and mute.
Yeah, I wasn't speaking so much of what goes into developing the plan. It's tied back to the data. Often we're making a plan for data that's a year or more old. And I just feel like it perpetuates some of the challenges in some way. And so it just seems like there needs to be a data and a plan in alignment, because we're talking about data that's usually a year old making a plan. It's just a very odd process. We've gone through it. I was hoping this year would be the year we would not have a plan, but unfortunately, we did not hit the number in the way that we had hoped we would. So it's just like you're always looking in the past instead of to the future in some ways, and it's just an odd process. And I just was trying to get some clarification, but thank you.
Well, no, and I appreciate you speaking up around that area, because that is one of the things that we really try to focus with districts as they approach this work. You have your past data that has identified you, but when you're looking at development of that plan, we definitely want you to look at current data. And I know some districts, I think, spend too much time trying to recreate the past data. Is it accurate? Where did CDE get this wrong? Where did we do wrong in reporting or whatever? And it really is, that's what the data drill down is. Take a look at what's happening right now and create your plan based on what is current. I mean, again, you know the history, so it's not that it happened just right now, but it is most important to look at where you are right now and look at your data from right now, including, again, qualitative data, because things do change. And it also helps you know whether or not you're moving in the right direction or the wrong direction. So we do want to, again, please feel free to go ahead, put questions in chat, but I recognize people will need to step out. So we just want to show you the upcoming supports. Again, you should have received an invitation to these Step 1 workshops, and there is some pre-work, again, that's on our website. I think it's just one video. So anyway, another thing for you to watch. And hopefully you have signed up for one of those sessions. And then we have the dates already for step 2. You'll be getting invitations for those in the future. So the step 2 workshop is just a virtual meeting. It's a 2-hour on June 18th from 10 to 12. The step 3 workshop will be another virtual meeting September 17th from 10 to 12. So your opportunity to see us in person will be at those step 1 workshops. And then as Kian went over our optional supports. Again, these will be open to everyone, but they are in particular for those that are already working on implementation. So those of you that are doing another Stepwell submission, but are actually implementing a current plan. So those community of practices in those 4 different areas, and then office hours that will also be offered to you, and those dates are to be determined. Okay. Of course, you can always contact us. We have a general website, SPP-TAP, at napacoe.org. And then there is CDE's email that is for all SIGDISP. So sigdisp@cde.ca.gov. And then hopefully you have the contact information for your FMTA consultant as well. Please reach out to them for any of your specific questions they can help you with. We have, as always, a brief survey. We'd like to get feedback immediately about what you need to know, what was helpful, and what else we can do to support you. So if you could take a moment to do that, we'd really appreciate it. Again, thank you very much for your time this morning, and we will be seeing you soon. Thank you.
We'll also be around for a few minutes, waiting for people to complete their feedback survey. So if you have additional questions, you can post those in chat or open up your mic.
Just a quick question. At the in-person session, will there be any proven interventions that have worked, in particular for Hispanic students who are new to the country and who are also in special education?
So we can speak again when we're there together about some of the successful strategies that have been used by LEAs. What we will be providing is a sample plan, a Stepwell submission, but definitely we can talk more about, again, every situation is different, so I wouldn't say the fix is the same for everyone, but there are some commonalities, yes.
Okay. And then, and if it's possible to know for an identified area that you've been in, if there's a district who was identified in an area you were in and they were able to get out of Dispro, I would love those particular resources in order to collaborate and see if we can learn something in order to move us forward a little bit more rapidly.
Oh, that's great, Tasha. Yeah, our implementation COPs are really good for that because we have LEAs that participate in those that are either getting out or even some that have already gotten out, and we often have them come and speak specifically about what they did. Yeah, so.
Okay, thank
And
you.
also the COP for, I think we've got one that's going to be focusing on Hispanic SLD students, and that will be a useful COP, and we've got some experts that will be providing some information as well.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.